Welcome to the Copy Closer podcast. Today we've got Dan Ferrari. This is the person I've been following, kind of like a stalker behind the scenes, watching his social media stuff. He doesn't post as much as I would want because he's just actually doing shit. You know what I mean? So this is a treat for all of us. I'm going to do my best to interview him and hopefully we can extract as much value as possible. He's got a very cool story. We're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into some tactical stuff, and we're going to move into what he's doing now. So Dan, dude, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me. I haven't told my story in a while, so it'd actually be pretty fun to revisit some of the past and add some of the new chapters to it.
Oh man, well, for some of the folks who may not know who you are, where do you come from? Where did you start? What were you doing before you even fell into the copywriting world?
Oh man, so I am 34 right now, and if you go back about 7 or 8 years, well, I'm 34 and I'm living in Hawaii, and I can see the ocean to my right here. So that's kind of the end point of this story. But going back about, let's see, it's 2019 right now. So if you go back to about 2011, I'm living in Washington, D.C. I work for a consulting firm, suit and tie every day to work. And, you know, it wasn't a bad job. Like, I had really good clients and my hours were pretty good. I was 9 to 5, done with it, no stress after I left the job, but just really wasn't the lifestyle I wanted to live. I just started having a little bit of that wanderlust, I suppose. I think this is about the time that 4-Hour Workweek came out. So probably like a lot of people that you've heard from, I read that and I was like, wow, you mean there's like an alternative? You know, like, I came from a very kind of templated lifestyle, go to college, get a good job. And I hadn't really thought that there were alternatives beyond that. So kind of the tangential story to that is my whole life, I had been surfing like 1 or 2 weeks a year because my dad grew up surfing on the East Coast and he was always like a lifelong surfer. But, you know, living landlocked in Virginia where I grew up, we didn't have the opportunity to do that very much. So it was kind of this love affair that I never got to fully explore. And incidentally, in 2010, maybe a year or so before all of this kind of desire started to build up, my uncle moved to Maui. And he had the whole family out for this giant 90th birthday celebration for my grandfather. And I flew through here to Honolulu just saying, you know what, I want to check it out. Like, that lifestyle has always appealed to me. And dude, I was here for 3 hours and I was like, I'm going to live here. Like, there's nothing that will deter me.
This is when you still had your corporate job?
Yeah, I was just on vacation.
So this is the tease. This is like, oh man, I need this.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was almost hard to leave. Like, it was like leaving someone that you've fallen in love with. Like, I dreamt about it every night for like months and I was looking at pictures online all the time. It was kind of pathetic in a way, but it was so motivating that when, you know, a year later, I had tried all these different ways to get another 9 to 5 job in Honolulu, but the job market here is not anything near what it is right in Washington, D.C. or something like that. And even the company that I was working for had an office here, but they couldn't even hire me here because they didn't have any openings. So I was like, oh man, I guess I got to figure out a way to do this on my own. And then that's when I started discovering kind of the alternative approaches that were available to me. And I really had no idea what to do, right? Like,
that was the 4-Hour Workweek that did it?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, 4-Hour Workweek, and then you start reading about all these digital nomads and
yeah.
But it was overwhelming. I had zero idea what to do, right? And the word copywriting had never even come into my ears at that point. Like, I had no idea. And so what finally happened is I went back out to visit my uncle again in 2011. I came home and then I just bought a one-way ticket and I was like, you know what? This is happening. I'm just going to do it.
Have you quit your job yet or any of this? Or
I hadn't quit my job yet. So
so you decided first, and then which is actually kind of a quality, it seems like, that a lot of successful people have, is you kind of made this decision, you bought your one-way ticket, and now you got to figure it out.
Yeah, right. Like, I burned the boat on the way in. Like, there was no turning back because I had the ticket and that was basically the mental thing that I needed to say, like, okay, I'm going to make this work. So incidentally, like, a month before I was going to leave, I still hadn't figured anything out. And there was a guy named Tommy Schultz who had gone to the same college that I did, the University of Virginia, and was sort of involved in some of these digital nomad circles. And like I had seen his name mentioned here and there. And he had just a ridiculously cool story because he had left college and then was working a job similar to mine in Washington, D.C. And then he was like, you know what, I don't want to do this. And he went to go work for one of those like aid organizations where you take like a 6-month project helping, third world developing village.
It's like the Peace Corps?
Peace Corps. I don't know if that was the exact one, but yeah, same model. And so, a lot of those things you get put into a really rough situation. But he got sent to the Philippines, got hooked up with all this really advanced like camera gear, underwater photography gear, and taught how to scuba dive. And his whole job was to photograph the reefs and see how climate change was changing them over time.
That sounds like a sweet job.
Yeah,
it's like not even a job. That's like
this is
right there.
Between that and like, getting sent to the Amazon where a lot of these things happen, right? Or something like that. But in any case, he fell in love with that craft. And then he moved to Bali afterwards and just became a surf photographer and had made a nice living for himself selling his prints online. And I just sent him an email, like completely randomly. I was like, hey man, we went to the same college and I'm kind of like, I'm moving to Hawaii in 60 days. And I was just wondering if you had any advice. And this was like right around Christmas time. And he actually happened to be home from Indonesia in Virginia, where I was still living at the time. He was like, why don't we have lunch? And so we had lunch and he basically explained, kind of gave me my first introduction to direct response marketing. And he said something along the lines of, well, if you want to surf and make your own schedule, there's a huge freelance market for copywriters. And if you're good at it, you can basically write your own ticket. You can make a bunch of money, make your own schedule, do it from anywhere in the world. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds perfect. And then I moved out here. I was still covered on my other job for about 6 months. And so like I still had, my contract, they were letting me complete it remotely. And so like that was just kind of in my mind for like 6 months. But then literally it was like, I completed that contract on a Friday. And this whole time I'd been like, all right, I'm a direct response copywriter. And Monday morning I hung the shingle, right? And I had no idea what that meant. Like I had never written anything. I had never gotten a client. So I just went to Starbucks. I read the ultimate sales letter, and then I wrote a fake sales letter for a product that didn't exist. And I went on Elance at the time, I guess is what it was called, and started trying to make things happen from there.
That's so fucking cool. Okay, so when I first got started, that's kind of some of the things I did. I mean, I wrote stuff for my own martial arts school. Some of the people who know my history know I owned a martial arts school with my friend Vit. But when I was trying to write for clients as well, I was fortunate because I had like a friend of mine say, hey, here's a couple $100, I'll write a sales letter. But I didn't really have samples for other people. And so I did the same thing. I would go on like ClickBank and I would just find a product and I'd be like, okay, that's the product I'm writing copy for today, That's okay. So you're writing some copy, you're doing that, and then you went on Elance. How long ago was this? This is amazing.
This was 2012.
This is 2000.
This was like, so the first job that I took, I think, was August 2012.
Wow. Okay. All right. And so was that through Elance as well, or is that from another place?
It was one of those ones, Elance, or what was the other? There was another one at the time. They all kind of became Upwork, I think, right, in the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of those. And literally my first job was some SEO flyer for an SEO provider for $15.
Wow.
I just sent him that fake sales letter that I had written, and he was like, okay, here's $15.
Wow.
I was like, whoa, that's awesome. I didn't realize that it was going to take me like 3 or 4 hours to do.
Yeah. But you know what?
It gave me half of minimum wage.
Yeah, but it gives you the taste. I think that's what's important. And what I think was also important is you still got a quick win under your belt. I mean, it may not have been a big win or something. You didn't make $15, but seeing the ability that you can make money online and find people? Like, where do you remember where your first client was even from?
No idea.
I had a client on Elance when I first started as well. It was freelancer.com, I think. I don't know. It was probably the same shit though.
Yeah, that might have been the one. Who knows?
He was from China, and I remember laughing. I'm like, wow, dude, I'm so broke. He's outsourcing to me.
Yeah, this is supposed to go the other way.
All right. So you're doing stuff on Elance. And so is that where you primarily found clients, or what happened next? Like,
yeah. So, at that point in my career, I think I had a natural tendency to be good at copywriting. Like even that first fake thing I wrote was really not that bad. I've always liked writing, and I've always kind of understood what good writing is, just on an intuitive level. So I was actually performing pretty well, but I was god awful at the business side of it, like getting clients, managing clients, getting them to give me work after I had completed one project, getting another. And I didn't even really know that there was a way to do it beyond, those marketplace websites. And so I really struggled for like probably the first 18 months. So if that was August 2012, it wasn't until like early 2014 that things started to even look somewhat bright. I had saved a lot of money. So I was really lucky because in that consulting career, I was making good money. And so when I cut the cord, I was probably sitting on 50K.
Wow.
To basically like keep me from starving. Because if I didn't have that, I literally would have starved. And even with that, so there came a point where I was trying to pinch pennies so much. It's very expensive living in Honolulu. I was trying to pinch pennies so much that I went to Costco and I wrote down the prices of all of the like bulk foods and how many calories like they were. And then I computed calories basically per dollar. And what I found was if I bought like the 10 gallon thing of olive oil, that was the cheapest source of calories for me. And so one meal a day, all I did was have like 3 tablespoons of olive oil.
Oh my God.
Which is the most
this isn't even ramen noodles.
Yeah, it was worse than that.
Coincidentally, I don't know if it's true, but I saw a VSL where doing that with olive oil is supposed to be good for you or something. So maybe you were actually doing something right
at the time because I was starving myself. But
God, that's unbelievable.
But you know what is like the wildest thing about that is one of the most enjoyable parts of my life. Like that whole period of time was just a really cool part of my life.
Why would you say that? I'm curious. Because most people wouldn't say that. They'd say that was the worst part of my life. I was struggling. I was starving. I didn't know where my next dollar was coming from. So it's cool. I want to hear your perspective on that because that's interesting.
I don't know. I think I always had this feeling that it was going to turn. And I believed in myself, and like I was living my dream outside of the few hours a day that I was really like head down on the computer, like trying to make it work. Like I was surfing every day, which was the entire reason that I had gone through all that struggle, right? I was making new friends. I was kind of like tasting the Hawaii that I had been dreaming about for a few years. And it was incredibly gratifying.
Damn, dude, that's fucking sick. It's cool to hear it because a lot of people wish, like I remember I've never surfed in my life, so I never had that kind of fantasy, but I have friends from Miami who were like, dude, Miami waves suck. We can't surf here. We have to go to the West Coast, or we have to go to wherever else, to do all this shit. And I was like, damn. So I remember hearing, and then I see them now and they're like one of them, for example, is an engineer. And I'm like, damn, this poor guy literally gave up his dream, lives in a landlocked state, and I don't think he's seen the beach in fucking forever, But you're someone who never gave up on that. And that's interesting to me because like was that hard for you to not give up? Because I know, at least on my side, there was always people saying, dude, you need to stop this bullshit and like get a real job, or you need to stop this nonsense and, put these martial art things away and grow up and put a suit and tie on, from my point of view.
I don't think I ever really thought that I would give up. If we fast forward the story, which we'll get to, like there are parts for times where I was like, you know, I don't know if this is going to work long term for other reasons. But at that specific point in time, I think a lot of it was just I was too naive also. Like I sort of thought, okay, this is the first grinded out 2-year period, and after that it's all butterflies, right? But yeah, like I think that almost sort of drove me through, is I just assumed that it was going to work out, and that it was going to work out very, very well. And I guess a little bit of me was stubborn and thought, there's no way that I can, you know, tuck my tail between my legs and turn around and basically go back to the life I had, because I think a lot of people doubted me.
Do you think that's what pushed you though? Did that give you a little chip?
I don't think it was a conscious driver, to be completely honest with you, but I know enough about how my subconscious ego states work at this point to know that, yeah, like a little bit of that embarrassment or the shame of like going back 6,000 miles and going back to my old boss who had been like, oh, you shouldn't do this. Like, I'll just give you extra vacation time, you know, and to like go back and revisit all of those people I would have felt like a failure, but at the same time, I think I would have felt like I had at least succeeded in trying. So I don't know. It's really hard to put myself in Dan 2014 shoes and say like, if I had really like given up a year and a half in, how I would have felt about it. But I know right now, like
I don't think you would have.
The way that it turned out, I feel great.
Yeah. No, 100%. Like, I don't think you would have given up. That's why it's so hard to act like what you would have done, because
yeah,
if you didn't do that, you wouldn't have done that. And you see that. Oh, I mean, I remember when I first moved out of my family's house, my early 20s, and you know, I would see things happen. Friends weren't necessarily entrepreneurs, all of them, but they would get a job, things wouldn't work out. They would pack up, go home to another state or city. And I'd be like, gosh, I never want to be that person. Like, that's like you're giving up. And so I think that's something that I always try to figure out, what are these qualities? Because it's not just you. Like, there's other people I've interviewed who feel like their back is against the wall, when maybe somebody else would have said, my back isn't against the wall, I can always just go home. But in your head, although you may have known that, you didn't let that be a real possibility, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of dichotomy that you've painted there. But, you know, to continue our story, there actually was a little bit of a taste of that. So at this point, it's 2014, and I've started dating a new girl. And incidentally, she gets her dream job, which she was a patent attorney. And the dream job for a patent attorney is working at the U.S. Patent Office, which, you know, is exactly where I had just left a couple years prior. It's in Washington, D.C., Virginia area, kind of in this government bubble. And so they basically told her, oh, if you move here and stay here for 18 to 24 months, then you can go work anywhere in the US again. And so that was where we started having these discussions. I was like, okay, like we're going to Virginia for 18 to 24 months, and then we'll move back to Hawaii after she does her thing. And, you know, we had a good relationship. So I was like, all right, like, I guess I'll do that, unfortunately. So we moved back to Virginia, and the funny thing is that relationship didn't work out, but it was one of the most serendipitous things that ever happened to me, because the U.S. Patent Office main headquarters literally shares the office complex with the Motley Fool's corporate headquarters.
And so for the people who don't know who the Motley Fool is, can you enlighten them?
So the Motley Fool is one of the largest direct response companies on the planet. In the financial publishing space, they are kind of the only behemoth that exists outside of the Agora umbrella. And for people who don't know who Agora is, they're this giant, you know, billion-dollar publishing company that publishes primarily financial newsletters. So the Motley Fool is kind of the yin to that yang. It's a 9-figure business that publishes financial newsletters, and their copywriting and their direct response marketing is world-class. And so at that point, I had known about, you know, the great copy that was coming out of that place, but I didn't know where it was. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anybody that worked there. And so, you know, right as we're getting ready to make this move, my dad sends me a link on, you know, monster.com or something like that, that the Street Authority is actually looking for a copywriter. And the Street Authority was another one of these sort of major financial publishers at the time. And I clicked on that link, and then that brought me down this rabbit hole. You know, they have other jobs that you might be interested in. And what do you know? The Motley Fool hiring a copywriter. So I click on that one, and I'm reading about it, and I'm like, they're headquartered literally like 5 minutes away from where we're going to be living. And so I applied for that job, and that was an interesting experience because what they required at the time was they paid me $7,500 or something like that to write a long form sales letter, a front end VSL, to beat one of their controls. And they said, if you can do this, like, we'll hire you full time. And so the first one I wrote actually bombed. I think it made 18 sales, which to a company that large is like absolutely atrocious. But what I didn't know is that they had given me a topic that was essentially a nut that no one had been able to crack on the in-house team for like years. So it was an impossible task, but the writing was good enough, and the promo was structured well enough that they gave me another opportunity and said, look, here's something that has a little bit more legs and a little bit more potential to win. If you can do this one, then like you're in. And so I did. Like I wrote that sales letter over the next few months. It's like mid 2014 by now. I think it tested in like June 2014. So this whole story is like 3 or 4 years old by this point, you know, and I'm 2 years into the career, and I write a control at the Motley Fool, which is, you know, like a really hard thing to do. And
that's a big fucking deal. That's a 9-figure company right there.
And they had, I think, like 400 applicants to this job, and none of them had been able to replicate that task or even get far enough into the process to even attempt it, right? And so I got hired into there, and, you know, quite literally that experience changed my life. And the person that hired me is Erin Winter, who very few people in this industry know, but he is probably one of the top 3 most successful financial copywriters of the last 10 years. He wrote just monster after monster after monster at the Motley Fool. And then he brought me in and basically gave me all the secrets, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then I had a ridiculous run there too. And so by a couple years later, I guess it is. So I was working there in either a freelance capacity or in-house for about 2 years. And by the end of that, I had only written front end stuff. So I was like in the freaking trenches, like the hardest.
That's like the hardest. I was just going to say, I'm like, you made it sound like I only wrote front ends. I'm like, you mean the hardest shit to write for?
Yeah. So like, it was an incredible learning experience. My game went from, you know, wherever it was to 50 times better in a rapid amount of time. But by the end of my time there, my copy was bringing in like 1 of every 2 customers that came into that business.
Wow.
So like that's I had definitely figured that customer out and exactly what I needed to tell them. And I had learned everything that they would give me, right? Like one of the things that I think a lot of copywriters could draw a line on the sand in a way is just like, when you work for someone, you get access to everything. So I would go in and I would sit in on the meetings of the traffic buyers, and I would listen to what they were saying was working and what headlines were working. And then I would go in and I would sit in on the meetings where they were talking about advertorials, and they say, oh, this advertorial is fatiguing, and I would offer to write a new one. So in addition to all the long form work that I was doing, I was really getting an education in all the other parts of the business. You know, I would talk to the people who were managing the email list and figure out how, you know, oh, people who click 9 times are 50 times more likely to buy something than someone who only clicked 6 times. Like I was just getting all this stuff. I was learning about recency and frequency and monetary value. And I was sitting in on meetings where we were overviewing like funnel testing and how to structure funnels and price tests and all this stuff. So it was just like this university almost.
Well, that's something
I could go attend a class essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, it's cool that you say that, because I've talked about that a little bit before on this podcast, where, you know, there's a few different paths I've noticed with copywriters, right? You know, let's say path number 1 is you become the freelancer. Path number 2 is you work at a company, you're an employee. Path number 3 is you eventually start selling your own stuff, right? That's kind of what I've seen.
Yeah.
You know what I've noticed is path number 2 really can, the one where you become an employee, can bring the best copywriters out, because they don't have to focus on necessarily going and finding clients, trying to retain all these other things you're talking about. They can focus on just writing copy. But not just that, if you're in-house, a lot of people have this thing about, oh, I don't want to be in-house. But if you don't have any skill as a copywriter and you have the opportunity to work in-house at a company like what you're talking about, that's the best education possible. I mean, you did everything right. You sat in on the right meetings. You did all the extra stuff. So you got a full rounded approach as a copywriter, not just I can write words. And now you get results. Freelancers never even get results usually.
Yeah. So to like step on a little bit of one of my soapboxes here, one of the things that I'm always kind of observing inside this industry is that there's actually a huge flaw in teaching someone to just be a copywriter, or teaching someone to just be a traffic buyer, or like everyone in our industry sort of begins as this specialist. And so if I sit down as that specialist to write a piece of copy, I may understand how to make that particular piece of copy work. But understanding how to turn that into, say, a year-long production schedule, or a year of work that's going to be high impact to not only myself, right, as I build my career and as I try to grow my income, but also beneficial to the business. Like, how do I manage myself over the long term to be absolutely essential to the business, to be moving the needle for them? That requires me to come out of that singular copy sort of task and to look at the whole, essentially like the rules of the game that govern direct response marketing, and to know what has to be done in order to win that game, right? If you don't know the rules of the game, you cannot win. If I am a football coach and I do not know the rules, I can't put together a good strategy. But if I know that, say, the clock runs when I run the ball, right? The clock keeps ticking. And I have a team that puts up a high score in the first half of the game, but then we blow it in the second half of the game because we can't control the clock. Then I know that I need to hire a running back that can run the ball 20 times and just run out the clock. He doesn't have to be a scoring god. He doesn't have to put up big yardage. He just has to get 3 yards over and over and over again and be able to take that beating, right? So I knew the rules of the game. I could put in a hiring strategy. I could put in a game plan. A lot of these copywriters, a lot of the traffic buyers who, by the nature of the business, they come in and they have to be that specialist, because you can't get paid as a freelancer, or you can't get paid as an in-house guy who can't perform, right? So you have to have that specialized skill almost to start, but it's almost backwards, because you don't understand the rules of the game yet. And over the long term, that's going to hamper you. It's going to hamper the companies that you're working for. And so
yeah,
I think, like, when I was at the Motley Fool, I got exposed to all that. I learned a lot about how leverage and opportunity costs and resource management works inside a direct response business, works inside of a specialist career, and how those things can be complementary, and that will be the tide that rises both boats, essentially.
Yeah, well, it sounds like
a little bit of a rant there.
No, I love it, because you bring up a very cool point that, it's almost like we have to transition from tacticians to strategists, right? When you're a copywriter and just a gunslinging copywriter, and I've made the mistake too, where I just specialize on copywriting. But when I started selling just my own stuff online, I realized there's a lot more stuff that can make something convert other than just the copy, right? So it's cool, because you really sound like you're emphasizing that whole strategist stuff. You're not really just a copywriter. Like, the first thing is, you just talked about a year-long promotion schedule, which no copywriter I know of even wraps their head around unless the client tells them there's a year-long schedule we got to write for. But you're thinking about that in advance, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, so like, this is, in essence, we're talking about fundamentals, but we're not talking about the fundamentals of writing copy. We're talking about the fundamentals of direct response marketing, right? And these days I do a little bit of coaching where I am working with copywriters. They are specialists, but so much of what we talk about is, how do we take advantage of leverage? How do we minimize opportunity costs? How do we find the places where that variability has the most opportunity to compound and create outsized wins? And then we start going deeper into, like, okay, so the fundamentals of that lead into the fundamentals of offer structure and positioning, and figuring out how scale at that particular company needs to be accomplished. And then from there, then you get down into like the promotional level, which then has its whole other level of like strategy that goes into a deeper hole. but you got to start at that huge chunk of things that is just literally what I said, the rules of the game. And then once you know the rules of the game, you can put your game plan in for the season, so to speak. You can put your game plan in for a particular offer. You can put your game plan in for even pieces down inside that funnel.
I love it, dude.
Game plan is how you win without spending 2 months on a promotion, right? Or it's how you do it faster. It's how you become quicker at it. You become better at it. You don't focus on things that are in the margins when you're focused on the 80-20, so to speak, of what will actually work.
Do you strategize your life as well? Like, do you have a schedule of your day? I know you're a surfer, so in my head, I'm like, nah, man, he's totally laid back. But when it sounds like you're not laid back at all. You just know how to relax.
So
in constant motion.
I surf every day, almost regardless, right? So I build my schedule around when I think the surf is going to be good, when the crowds are going to be the least thick, things like that. So there's no set, okay, I'm doing this at this time, I'm doing this at that time. But I do try and wake up pretty early and have like a quick morning routine. And then if it's time to surf, I go surf. If not, then I do work. But the beauty of that sort of commitment is that it really forces me to strip away a lot of stuff. Like, what I do in a day is high impact, or I try to make it as high impact as possible. And I'm sort of forced to do that, because if I go spend 2 hours in the water and then another, 30 minutes on each end of that, like getting sunscreen on and doing all that stuff and getting dressed and changing and showering, like it's a large commitment in my day. And so I have to be strategic about it, because then, I also have a personal life. I live with my girlfriend, and like, I don't want to be working from 6 p.m. to midnight every night when she's home. And so like my day is condensed into this pretty small period of time. And I focus very deeply on what matters. And that's a lot of what I learned, right? Like, I don't spend a whole lot of time tweetering around in the margins on copy that isn't going to be high impactful, or, wasting time on 2 days of edits when I can do the high leverage stuff in 2 hours.
Dude, that's so important. And that's what makes you more of a strategist than just a tactical copywriter. You have that full view that you're looking at. So you went from working at Motley Fool. Did you leave there around what, like 2016 or so?
Yeah. So early 2016, I left the Motley Fool. I had a great run there, fantastic company. So nothing but, the highest praise for that company, for the people that work there, for my experience there. But, I was hungry. I was always looking for other ways to do this. And the most important thing is I was still in Virginia at the time.
You wanted to surf.
I needed to get back in the water. And so, 2 hours, or not even 2 hours, an hour north of the Motley Fool is Baltimore, where all these Agora companies are located. And so, a little sidebar to our story, when I had written that first control at the Motley Fool, I was still a freelancer. And I had actually applied to that street authority job. And I had gotten in touch with Joe Schriefer, who runs Agora Financial, which is one of the largest divisions inside of that Agora umbrella. And so I actually had job offers from all three of those places at the same time. And I took the Motley Fool one, but I'm a smart enough guy to know that I'm a long-term player here. And Joe Schriefer is just a fantastic human being, a fantastic guy. And we became really good friends over the course of that, like 2 years. We stayed in touch. We were always just like geeking out over direct marketing. And so it became a very easy transition to start thinking about, oh, well, maybe I can just go work for Joe. And that's basically what started happening, but not really in the way that I had planned. So once I started thinking that that was in my future, Erin Winter, who I mentioned as my copy chief at the Motley Fool, he was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And so what really ended up happening is, after we both left the Motley Fool, a few months later, we were essentially like both looking at this Agora Financial job, and we were like, why don't we just start an agency, and that'll be our first client and we'll build from there. And so that started as me, Erin, and we brought in an operations guy who, basically what his job was to, copywriters are like these egotistical, like maniacal kittens, essentially. So his job was to herd us 2 kittens. We call him a operations guy, but really he's like our manager, and he tells us what to do. And he's just the most unbelievable human being at what he does. And his name is Joel Karlinski. So me, Joel, and Erin started this thing, and that was 3.5 years ago almost. And we're still running strong. So it's grown from the 3 of us to like, I think we have, I don't know, 8 or 10, 12 writers working for us at any given time.
What's the name of your company?
It is dig.in.
Dig.in?
Yeah, which I honestly, to this day, dig in. I do not know what dig in really stands for. I thought it was digital innovations or something like that, but really we're just dig in, and we have all these little fun things, you know, like dig.in turns into dig.fest whenever we have a party and all this stuff. Like,
that's
so
awesome.
The name in itself is kind of this ingenious move of copywriting that has opened up all these fun little ways for us to communicate. But so we started just the 3 of us at Agora Financial, and we are still working with Agora Financial to this day. We're actually exclusive to them in the financial space. So like we basically said, we won't write for anybody else in the financial publishing world if you give us this contract. And we've been doing that for the last couple of years. We've had a tremendous run of success for them. And then maybe this is the second to last chapter in the book, but I said, look, like that's half of really what we could be doing, or less than half of what we could be doing. I've always had a little personal interest in, you know, health and fitness and like living well and all that stuff. So I was like, why don't we just start pursuing some of these health clients? And so I guess about 2 years ago now, we started to dabble in some of the health stuff, right? Like we had only written financial copy for years and years and years, and all of our tricks were in the financial thing. And again, like this is where the fundamentals served me so incredibly well, is because we jumped into that health market. And I think the first package I wrote in the health world bombed, similar to the first package I wrote in the financial world. And then since then, like we've just had an incredible track record. We've written controls for Organifi and Green Valley Natural Solutions and New Market Health, and pretty much like all the big players in the health space. And it's been an incredible learning experience for me. I was able to build a little bit team to chief. So then I went from writing to chiefing, which was a whole new learning experience. And now we're hedged, right? So if the financial markets crash, obviously financial publishers are very exposed to that market risk. If that were to happen, you know, who knows what Donald Trump is going to tweet tomorrow? If that happens and everything, the bottom falls out, like we have all these health clients that are basically begging for us to work for them more.
Wow.
So that was
a
a
great
smart move
position
too.
to be in, huh?
Yeah. And that's a smart move too, is like, you know, you hear all these people talk about specialization, and it is very, very valuable in your career. Write financial copy, get incredibly good at it. Write fitness copy, get incredibly good at it. Write martial arts copy, get incredibly good at it. But at some point, you should look at the landscape and say, what happens if all of this goes away? Or what happens if my number one client goes away and then their competitors don't want to work with me or whatever, right? Like there's a contingency plan in place. And for us, like it was very obvious to say, we need a contingency plan to the financial stuff. And Dan is very interested in figuring it out. So like, let's go send him to the moon and see if like he can put the lander down and take steps. And we did. And I would encourage anyone to kind of just look at their career in that way and say, like, now that I've established, you know, where my bread is buttered, so to speak, like if that bread gets lit on fire or whatever, like where's my next meal coming from?
Dude, you've done such a cool job. You think unlike any copywriter I've met, you think more like a real business owner. You're talking about leveraging yourself. You're talking about, you know, not being exposed to too much risk. It's very cool to hear this, because I feel that we got, at least through this small podcast, we were able to get a glimpse of where you started and how cool it's been to see your transition just over the years from being a freelancer, being an employee, being an agency now that's really taking on big clients. And you also get to work whenever you want. It seems like because you have the lifestyle you want. You surf every day, you said. I mean, that's awesome. That's fucking cool. So
well, you know what the wildest thing about everything you just said, which is risk exposure and all this stuff and, mitigating risk and managing timelines and opportunities is it all comes back to those rules, right? Like it all comes back to the fact that this is a highly leveraged business. It's a business with variable outcomes. It's a business where the two extremes, the losses and the wins are incredible. They're not even compounded. They're beyond compounded. I think there's a word, but whatever, like they take off. And so you're really just trying to find your way between those extremes and manage resources and manage time and manage money and manage people in a way that gets you to those leveraged wins as fast as possible. And a lot of that just comes down to production, right? Like if there's one thing in this business that really wins, it's producing a lot. And so if you manage yourself, you manage your employees, you manage the writers that work for you, you manage the offers you create with that one sort of guiding principle, which is just like test a lot of high leverage things, whether that's new promos or new offers inside existing controls. Like that's how you get to the promised land, essentially.
Dude, you spit so much gold. Where can people find out more about you? Maybe get on some kind of list or something so you can keep getting this type of value from you.
Yeah, so I have an email list that people can find me at www.ferrarimedia.com, which is pretty easy. It's just my last name, Ferrari, which is spelled exactly like the car, and then media. And I try and email, maybe once a week, but sometimes I don't. So, I'm not going to be the guy that emails you every day if you're looking for something like that. And this is a lot of the stuff that I talk about, right? And it all comes back to this sort of rules of the game principle. And then I get on various soapboxes. Last week I sent an email about how to essentially build and train and develop a team of copywriters. And I got a ton of replies back because people are like, holy crap, like I never considered any of that. But really it comes back to the same thing. Like, how do you continue running a business in a way that produces the volume to find these high leverage outcomes while also managing, say, a developed copywriter versus one who's up and coming? What projects do you put them on to not only make them better over the long term, but to keep the business hitting those high outcomes?
This is huge, man. So if people can find out more, again, the website is ferrarimedia.com.
Yeah. And it's just like a simple, gross looking opt-in. There's nothing fancy about it, but you will find some gold on the other end if you stick around for a little while.
Dude, you're the man. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Copy Closer podcast.
Yeah, dude, this has been awesome. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Take care.